All right, everybody. I think people are still going to be coming in, but I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for attending the November session of our ROSC presentation series. This is when we have ROSC members and partners come and do a presentation on topics that are current in the recovery community. And this month, I'm very happy to have Danny Sourbis here to present for us. Danny came on board with us pretty recently, within the past couple of months. He is not only working as a recovery coach at Serenity House, but he is a ROSC community mentor liaison, which is a big way of saying he's our connection to ROSC in our region. But in addition, he's also got an LCPC and he is a CSAT candidate as well. Since we're kind of moving into the holiday season, I thought that it would be appropriate to have a presentation on family and how that kind of interacts and affects the recovery process. The family, depending on your situation, if you're in recovery, can either be an amazing resource for you, an amazing ally for you, or it can be something that, is slightly triggering. So I thought it would be good to have a presentation on that, how the family affects the recovery process and how people in recovery affect their family. That's another thing that we have to remember, because as much as we want them as a resource, we also have to think about, when we were in our active addiction, how that was affecting, the ones that we love and our family members, and really how we can look at it in a different light now that we're recovered. So Danny, I'm going to turn it over to you. You're now the co-host. So Danny Sourbis, everybody.
Thank you, Jared. I appreciate that introduction, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday morning. It's chilly and wet outside, but that's why Zoom is a beautiful thing nowadays, right? So I'm going to share my screen here. Can everybody see the screen?
Yep, you're good.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm just gonna get into the presentation. So again, the holidays are coming up. We have Thanksgiving next week, and Christmas is just around the corner, New Year's. So they call it, the trifecta, especially in the recovery community of, stressful holiday times. So some objectives of this presentation is identifying ways in which addiction impacts the family system, discussing some family roles that come out of addiction. So I'll go over 6 of the more major roles that come out of it, but of course there are other ones. I'm going to define codependency, go over some strategies of how to establish healthy boundaries, but also discuss, rigid and porous boundaries. We'll talk about treatment options, and I'm also going to provide some resources. And then at the end, we'll have some time if there's any questions, we can have a discussion together. Breaking it down, what is addiction? Addiction is a treatable chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, environment, and individual's life experience. Chronic, that's long-term, right? So if it's chronic, what hope do we have? That's often what people with addiction think, right? If I'm always going to have this disease, what's the point? Well, that's where the word before that comes in, treatable. It's proven that through therapy, through support, through education, that addiction can be treatable and get to a point where it's managed. So even though it's lifelong, even though I might say for the rest of my life that I have an addiction, I'm going to learn ways to be able to manage it and rely on my supports and skills that I've learned in order to get better. The genetics are responsible for half of the risk of alcoholism and drug addiction. Genes affect the way that we metabolize the drug and also how our brain and our thinking patterns respond to it. Our nerve cells signal one another and how we regulate our emotions or our activity. And, having the alcohol or drug in our system, the substance in our system, really affects that. Addiction, when you start off in life, right, you would hope that you don't have chaos. You start with a place of calm and serenity. That's the goal that we have. Um, the addiction, unfortunately, substance use disorders lead to a sort of chaosness. So we want to reestablish trust and harmony instead of the lies, manipulations, hopelessness, fear that come out of addiction. Why is it a family disease? Addiction affects every person in the family. The whole family should be a part of the treatment process, not just the identified patient. Um, and we'll get into that with the roles in a little bit. Families often lack resources and understanding of addiction as a whole. So if they don't know what treatment options there are or what they can do to get better, then sorry, excuse me. If they don't know what the treatment options are, how to get better, then how do you suppose that they're going to learn? We have to make those resources available, we have to provide that education and teach a way of understanding not only what the addict is experiencing, but also what each family member is experiencing, how it impacts them. They also need to be educated how to instill boundaries and keep the addict and themselves accountable. Some family risk factors are family dysfunction, could be conflicts, arguments amongst the family. How do we handle any stressors that arise? Could be aggression, sexual, physical, verbal abuse. A parent who is depressed or suffers from other mental illnesses. And if one or more parent abuses or is addicted to alcohol or drugs, how that impacts them. Sorry about that. Here's some statistics. About 1 in 10 children live in households of at least one parent who in the past year had alcohol use disorder. That's a big number. 1 in 10 children. That may not seem a lot, but think about how many children there are in the world. That's millions of children who are impacted by that. And sons of alcoholic fathers are 4 times more likely to become alcoholics themselves. About 1 in 35 children live in households with at least one parent who had an illicit drug use disorder in the past year. Children who use drugs are more likely to have one or more parents who also use drugs. So again, the genetics being passed down that we discussed in the previous slide. Children of addicts are 8 times more likely to develop an addiction. 46%, and I really believe this is underreported, but 46% of US adults say they have a family member or close friend who is addicted to drugs or has been in the past. And I mean, just people in this room, I want you guys to think about probably everybody, whether it's due to our profession or think about before we were professionals, right? Most of us have at least known somebody, if not having an addiction themselves. A child who perceives that a parent is more permissive about the use of drugs is more likely to use drugs themselves. Healthy versus dependent family system. So in a healthy family system, self-worth is high, not only for the individual, but for the family as a whole, right? So that, I'm feeling good about myself, my family feels good. That means that we're pretty healthy, right? Well, that's if we're being honest. Communication is direct, clear, specific, and honest. I'm going to be honest about what I'm doing, what I'm going through, what I have planned. Feelings are expressed and encouraged to be expressed. So if I'm having a problem, I'm going to say, hey, I'm feeling nervous or I'm scared about something versus, nope, everything's okay. Generally when you hear everything's okay, it usually means there's something more to it, right? But I want to know how you're feeling, especially if it's anger, right? I often teach in different kind of classes and different presentations I do about anger being a secondary emotion, which we probably all know. It's so important to figure out what the root of anger is. What's the primary emotion? Is it fear? Is it anxiety? Is it depression? Is it rejection, disappointment? We have to learn to communicate those feelings so that way we can better be able to address it. Rules are human, flexible, and appropriate to change. So as we grow as people, our needs change, right? The rules that need to be in place change. So, You're not going to have the same rule as a child, as a teenager, as an adult. So we have to be flexible and change accordingly. And when it comes to addiction, you know what I mean? The same kind of thing applies. So what rules are important for the addict early in recovery versus as they move a little bit later in recovery? Sometimes they need to be the same, but sometimes they can actually be a hindrance. You know, they might say like, hey, I'm, you know, a year in recovery now, and no, I don't plan on using, but maybe I need a little bit more flexibility in terms of, you know, being able, some trust that I can go out and I can do certain things and that I'm not going to come back and use. If I feel like you're keeping too tight of a leash on me, that could be, you know, a trigger for me to want to go use. It's natural to link and be open to society. You know, it's it's the opposite of isolation, right? Usually in the dependent or addictive family, I'll get into the other side. You want to isolate, you want to keep things in house, versus no, I want to be open about what's happening. So that way I'm breaking stigma, I'm losing shame, things of that nature. Each person has goals and plans to get there, which are supported by the entire family. So, you know, a child can have a goal, you know, a teenager or somebody in college could have a goal to be a nurse or a doctor, and the family is there to support them. Versus, oh, you're not good enough. I don't think you can do that. We don't come from a good family. Um, Things like that really stick with people and create a different kind of trauma inside of them and wanting to use. Sorry, all my throat's kind of dry, so I need to take a drink every so often. Rules in a dependent or addicted family. Dependence use of the drug is the most important thing in life, and we'll see that a little bit later on when I'm discussing the addict role. Um, Everybody is really focused on it, right? So it's like, is the addict using? Are they hiding things from me? Are they lying for me? What ways can I get them support? Drug use isn't always necessarily the cause of the family problems. Denial is often the root. So it's, you know, denial is being unaware. It's, you know, unconsciously believing or not believing in something. So even though all of the signs can point to somebody being an addict, they may not really be aware of it. And the family may not be aware of it because maybe they're being successful in their life or their career, right? Um, Blaming others, cover-ups, enabling family addiction. I have a whole role based on all of that. Again, problems not discussed outside of the family, what's said, what needs to be kept in here, and family does not share the way they think or feel. Disclosure. When is it okay to tell family members? And I often say the sooner the better, right? If you're able to get it out there, and tell people what the problem is, then they can help and support and understand you better. But even more importantly, it's the addict has to be ready, right? If the addict isn't ready to tell people what's going on, they're not necessarily ready to get better. And then the family kind of stays in this limbo, which I'm not saying don't tell, but I'm just saying, I'm just trying to explain that if they're not ready, things kind of stay stuck. Um, is it okay to tell children? And is there a better time to tell them versus when not to tell them? To me, it depends on it's on maturity, right? It's You don't want to tell a 3-year-old, hey, I have this alcohol, you know, I'm an alcoholic or a drug addict or of a substance use disorder. They're not going to really understand what that means. And, you know, if you're a parent or an older sibling, you're often their role model and they're going to want to copy what you're doing, whether they understand what's happening or not. So I'd say it's based on maturity. You know, some people have asked me in the past, well, is 13 a good age? Is it 15? At what place are they able to understand what's happening? I've had 12-year-olds who are more mature than 20-year-olds, right? So it's what are they able to comprehend? What are they able to understand? And maybe when they're 12, you might say, yes, you know, daddy or brother or mom or whoever has a problem with addiction, but not go into the details of the addiction until maybe they're older. But to me, it is always a good thing to be able to share what is going on. Just the details are better at certain times than others. Like it's in how much detail should be shared. Well, again, children I just mentioned, but let's say it's with a spouse or with a sibling of your age or with your parents. As much as possible, you want to share hiding places so you don't repeat those same mistakes. Who are your user friends, your contacts? You know what I mean? This is who I've gone to in order to obtain my substance of choice. This is who I use with. So that way, you know, if I say that I'm going with this person, there could be a chance that I'm going to use with them. What are my triggers? That's important to know. What are signs and symptoms of my use? Things of that nature. Rigorous honesty is encouraged, but is it what can be expected? I mean, most addicts have spent a great deal of time practicing their lies, their stories, ways of how to manipulate, right? Um, and even when they have every intention to get better, there's times, unfortunately, where they can slip or have a relapse. Maybe not in action, could be in thinking. It doesn't always have to be in action. And, you know, because they're so used to this cycle of hiding what's going on, they're scared, right? You're going to see when I'm going over the rules, a lot of the underlying feelings are fear, anxiety, shame. So, giving a timetable of when it's okay to, okay, wait, I need to be honest. This is what I was thinking, or this is what I did. And that's different for everybody. I usually say the absolute longest should be 48 hours, but you can discuss, is it 2 hours? I have to be honest with you. Is it 12 hours, within 24 hours, things of that nature. So, you know what, mom or dad or wife, brother, husband, whoever it may be, I was doing so well. If I'm an alcoholic, I hadn't had a drink in a year, but I need to tell you that about 2 hours ago, I was so stressed out about work and about just certain things at home. I went to the store and I had a drink. And even though that causes some relief, it can cause relief for the addict by being honest and sharing, or for the person receiving it. We also have to be prepared that it can cause some argument, some tension, but the goal is hopefully that if we have this timetable in place ahead of time, we can move past that versus fixating on it. Impact. The stability of the home is impacted. So again, leading into a place of chaos. Family unity. Family can break off into, different coalitions. For example, a mother and a son may be against the father and the siblings, right? The mom may be enabling what the son is doing, making excuses, versus the father and the siblings being really upset with what's happening. Or it could become a child and the children versus the parents, or the males versus the females. Could be any number of those things. Mental health. I mean, that's hugely impacted. It's often what comes first, mental health or addiction. It's a big argument that happens, and the reality is they both coincide together. So attachment disorders can occur at an elevated rate for children affected by alcohol. This could be due to abuse or neglect. There's deficits that in cognitive and emotional functioning, less resilience. About 1 to 2/3 of child maltreatment cases involve some degree of substance abuse. Being overly emotionally responsible, taking on adult roles at a younger age, increased risk for internalizing problems such as depression, anxiety, substance use, or externalizing problems such as conduct, stealing, impulsivity, truancy, lying. A parent with substance use disorder is 3 times more likely to physically or sexually abuse their child, which can lead to other problems for them later on. Physical health. Maternal abuse can cause the growing fetus to have birth defects, fetal alcohol syndrome, or other alcohol or drug-induced effects. Stress causes the body to age more rapidly. Risk for STDs, of sharing of needles, or things of that nature. Or if you're inebriated and having unprotected sex, poor decision making. Finances, paying for your substance, paying for treatment, not having enough finances for housing. All these things come into play. And now I'll get into some of those family dynamics and roles that I was discussing. Different roles family members play may fit influence and the influence it has on the addict and others. So these are six roles that are more typical than others, but there are other roles. So I'll go over the addict, the hero, the mascot, lost child, scapegoat, and caretaker enabler. The addict. The addict. Alcohol, drugs are a way of coping with addicts' feelings and or chaotic environment they have created for themselves. Often they forget how to cope with their feelings that they had previous. So if they started drinking or using because they're an anxious person or because they're depressed or suffer some sort of trauma, then even when they start becoming clean in the absence of their substance, now they don't know how to deal with that anxiety and trauma, right? Or depression. So they want to run more back to what they were using. They lie, manipulate, sabotage relationships they have with others. Well, that's how they were able to obtain or use in the past. They sabotage the relationships usually with the people they care about the most. So typically it starts within the family. I'm going to steal from you because I trust that you'll be there for me, or I'm going to manipulate you and say, you know what, I can't pay my rent. So can you give me a little bit extra money, or I'm having trouble paying with groceries, which may often be the case, but instead of using it for that, they're using for their substances. They become the center of attention and recovery. Everybody believes, well, if the addict can't get better, then what are we supposed to do? We don't see what's going on with the rest of the family and the roles I'll be discussing. Family feels the world revolves around the addict. Sacrifices are made for the recovery process. Time, energy, maybe missing work, right? Because they're taking people to their appointments, to their meetings, to therapy sessions, to treatment in or out of state. And these are some of the underlying feelings: shame, fear, anxiety, depression, hopelessness, unworthiness, disappointment, and loneliness. The hero. The hero needs to make the family look good. They're often the perfectionist. So if I can succeed in school, in work, in extracurricular activities and athletics, you know what? If I could do that, then it's going to take away attention from the addict, right? That's kind of what the hero believes and thinks. Even if something negative is going on over there with the addict or with the rest of my family, because I'm successful, people are not going to focus on that. People are going to focus on what I'm doing. They're typically the oldest child or eldest child who's not addicted. They may be parentified. Now, oftentimes when I say that, people are like, oh yeah, okay, if they're the oldest child, they're parentified to their younger siblings, sure. But it can also be to the parents. Whether the parents are users or if it's another sibling that's a user, oftentimes the parents don't know how to handle that. Again, there's a state of chaos that's going on with the family. And if the parents aren't able or equipped to handle that, the parentified child, who's the hero, might say, you know what, mom, dad, I understand what's going on. You know what I mean? Let me help you. Let me do what I can. Maybe they start working at an earlier age than what they need to. More so it's an emotional support for them. Underlying feelings for them are fear, guilt, embarrassment, and shame. They can experience, excuse me, they can experience low self-esteem and feel inadequate if they're not able to save the addict or the family. The mascot, the jester, they tried to divert attention from the addict by jokes, right? Could be positive jokes, could be negative jokes, could be, they could be a comedian like you see on TV, or they could just say harmful jokes about the addict. And that's, that becomes really harmful to the family and brings a lot of shame. So, like we said, Thanksgiving's next week, right? The jester might say, you know what? There's going to be so much food left over. Mom and dad, they absolutely hate when there's, too much food. So, you know what? Hey, Danny, you'd like doing pot, right? Can you bring us some weed over here? That way we can all get the munchies and eat as much food as possible. Or they say, Danny could be, I'm in recovery, man. Why are you saying that to me? You know, I haven't smoked pot in a long time. Yeah, but you know who does it, who can get us a pot, don't you? You know what I mean? Just little things like that. They may not even be meant as harmful, but they can be. You know what I mean? The addict might say, like, oh, if they don't care about me, you know what I mean? If I'm just a joke to everybody, why shouldn't I just use, right? Typically the youngest child, underlying feelings of shame, anxiety, insecurity, fear, and anger. The lost child, silent, out of the way family member. So, maybe on Thanksgiving, they're sitting there just sitting in front of the TV watching football, or they're sitting on the couch looking at their phone. They're not really a part of the conversations that are going on amongst the family because they fear that drugs or alcohol are going to be brought up. Because they don't want to mention it. They don't want to talk about that. They want to avoid that as much as possible. So let's pretend again, Danny's over here in recovery, and mom goes, oh, aren't you proud of Danny? Look at what he's doing. He's a few months sober. We should be happy about that. Lost child goes, oh, great. That's whatever. Do you see the score of the Packers game? They're getting killed. Woohoo. Saying that as a Bears fan, sorry. Because they're just trying any way they can to avoid that conversation about the addiction. They don't want to cause any problems. They'll often give up their needs. So if they maybe have something going on in their lives, maybe they're, play an instrument and they have band coming up, for example. But you know what? Danny just relapsed again. Danny's got to go to treatment. So don't worry about, I'll be fine. At band by myself. Mom, dad, you don't got to come. Just go take care of that mess over there. Daydreamers, typically the middle or third child. Underlying feelings for them can be guilt, loneliness, hurt, neglect, and anger. The scapegoat. The scapegoat often acts out in front of other people. They'll rebel, make noise, divert attention from the addict. They want to draw attention away from the real problem. So, see me, I'm here. Don't forget about me. I need your attention too. You guys have been spending so much time worried about Danny and what Danny's doing. You forgot about me. I need some help, right? I might have an addiction myself. Danny uses substances, right? And his life is going down the drain. But you know what? I have a gambling problem. Why aren't you paying attention to my life? You know what I mean? So I'm going to act out. I'm going to do everything I can for you to notice me. Danny's in treatment? Huh, I just lost my car. Which one means more? Both are bad things, right? Well, they're just trying desperately to get the attention of other people. Often could be a source of blame. The addict might blame the scapegoat for what they're doing. I don't have that written down, but that's something that comes out of it as well. Underlying feelings include emptiness, guilt, lonely, anger, and shame. Caretaker enabler. Often the mom. Doesn't have to be, could be anybody, but this is often the mom in the family. Makes all the roles possible. Tries to keep everyone happy and balanced despite the addiction or other family issues. Make excuse for all behavior and actions. Well, the addict, he's had a hard life, right? He was supposed to be, a star athlete, and then he blew out his knee. So wouldn't you turn to something to make you feel better? The mascot. The mascot, he's just joking because he's trying to make light. He's trying to make everybody happy. Yeah, maybe some of his jokes might be inappropriate, but he's a good boy. He's just trying to make everybody happy, right? The lonely child. That's just how they are. She just wants to relax and be left alone. We can't bother her, she doesn't cause any trouble. So let's just leave her alone. Doesn't mention recovery or getting help because they're typically in a state of denial. They don't believe or have awareness that there's actual problem. And if they do have slight awareness, well, that would mean something is wrong in my family. And my goal is to protect my family and present them without problems to the public. Underlying feelings are inadequacy, fear, and helplessness. So now a lot of these roles lead to codependency. One of the most prominent issues is that the entire family becomes consumed with the addict and his user. This unhealthy pattern of enmeshment with the addict's disease is called codependency, and it manifests itself in a variety of ways. Codependency is a set of, maladaptive, compulsive behavior learned by the family members in order to survive in a family experiencing great emotional pain and distress, usually as a result from alcoholism, addiction, or some sort of secret problem. The following are common symptoms displayed by a codependent family. Obsession with the addict. They want to know what the addict is doing, where they are, who they're with, at all times. It's an attempt of control, right? If I can control this person and what they're doing and know what they're doing, then maybe I can stop their addiction. Maybe I can stop them from acting out and doing things to harm themselves or someone else. Hope for wishful thinking. If only they didn't blow out their knee, they wouldn't have turned to pain pills. They wouldn't have become addicted to opioids and eventually gone the heroin route. Enabling caretaking, unable to say no, kind of went over that in the last slide. Unable to hold the addict accountable. So this goes with no or limited boundaries, poor expectations. If I can't instill healthy expectations or boundaries, how can I hold the addict accountable? They're just gonna do whatever they want anyway. Giving of money, time, and energy. Poor self-care, sacrificing their own needs to help the addict. Maybe I'm having trouble paying for my own rent, but you know what? My sibling is having problems and I have to support them. I'm the hero, right? I'm the one who's supposed to take care of the family. So I have to help them out, as whatever way that I can, even if that means not taking care of myself and my needs. I'm not spending time with my family, with my children, because I'm taking care of maybe my sibling or my parents or, my core family. Don't talk about problems or feelings. Again, earlier when we discussed healthy family versus unhealthy family. Fears rejection. I'll get into that in the next page, in 2 pages. Do as I say, not as I do. Gotta love it, especially if the family has multiple levels of addiction. The parent's an addict, or alcoholic, and says, you know what? We're both alcoholics, but you know what? You need to listen to me. I'm the parent. So even though I'm sitting here drinking, relapsing, I expect you not to do the same. So don't do that. Make us proud beyond realistic expectations. Be strong, right, and perfect. Again, beyond realistic expectations, we need to set up realistic expectations for the addict and the family to survive. Family members often become the roles they are playing and make decisions based on those roles. So the addict is like, well, you know what? I need to lie to get what I want. The enabler says, well, I can't have a family with problems, so I'm just gonna keep playing off like everything's okay. The hero needs to continuously find ways to succeed to make the family look better. This leads to aversion and a lack of self, which can result in compulsive behaviors and repressed feelings that interfere with life functioning. Codependents become addicted to people, relationships, behaviors, or things. So with that, they're addicted to people, right? And relationships within the family, people fall into those roles. They become addicted to those roles. They don't know any different. Oftentimes they don't have awareness of the role they fall in. So bringing awareness to that is key. The goal in overcoming codependency is to make each family member whole again and remove the roles they have fallen into. How do we do that? Begin with the self. Each person needs to start with, what do I need to change? From the addict all the way through the enabler. What are those underlying feelings that I mentioned? How do they impact my decision making? Which are strengths and which are weaknesses? And I encourage people, and it's important to write out, what are your strengths? Because you want to build on those strengths, right? Why is it important to know the weaknesses? Well, number one, you don't want to repeat them, but number two, you want to learn from them. Most importantly, what can I learn from my weaknesses? How can I turn a weakness into a strength? Letting go of perfectionism and building our weaknesses. Rigorous honesty, which I mentioned earlier. Boundaries. Personal boundaries are rules and limits we set for ourselves in relationships with others. I wish I could take credit for this chart, but this chart's from therapista.com, but I just think it's really important to share. Rigid boundaries. They're about keeping people emotionally distant. We don't want to be too close with other people. We avoid intimate relationships, don't want to ask for help, very protective of our information. And the reason we do so is because we are trying to avoid rejection. People with rigid boundaries say if people become too close to me, they're not going to like me. And if they don't like me, they're going to reject me. And that's going to maybe send me down the spiral of my acting out again. Porous boundaries is the opposite of that. Porous boundaries are oversharing personal information. It's becoming too involved with other people. I just met you. I'm not going to tell you my life story. That's not appropriate. That's it's an unhealthy porous boundary. We don't want to say no to other people, kind of like the caretaker enabler, because that can hurt their feelings and maybe they're not going to care about me or love me. The hero is over involved in other people's problems. I need to be able to save whoever I can. Accepting of abuse or disrespect. And for them, opposite of rigid, they fear rejection not because they're keeping others, this is because they're too close. If I don't listen to what other people do, if I don't follow what people want, then they're going to reject me for that. So even in the case of abuse or disrespect, right? People stay in abusive relationships because, well, they care about me. Other people aren't going to care about me if I don't comply or go along with what they're doing or saying. Healthy relationships, value own opinions, don't compromise values for others, share personal information in the appropriate way, does not over undershare, no personal wants and needs, accepting when others tell them no. So how to establish boundaries and accountability. Change your strategy. The old way wasn't working. What can you do different? What's the definition of insanity? Trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. This is where the strengths and weaknesses come into play. What did work? What didn't work? What can we do now? Is it involving somebody else? Is it going to treatment? Is it being honest that we haven't been before? Families can't fix everything. At some point, the addict has to take action and responsibility for change. As family, we want to fix things so much, right? Especially for somebody we love and care about. Sometimes the best thing we can do is letting an addict or substance user, misuser hit rock bottom. They're not going to learn until they hit that thing. That doesn't mean that we give up on them. That means that we're there for them once they're ready to accept the change that they need to be, that needs to take place. United fronts. Families have to be on the same page when establishing boundaries with the addict. If there's a crack in the family foundation, the addict will find and exploit it. So, with Thanksgiving, if we have people coming to it, if we know families coming by and one is an addict, if the whole family is saying, you know what, no matter what, we're not going to lend money to the addict. We know this is a stressful time for them. We know this is a trigger point. And they have themselves that told us, don't lend me money at this point in time because I may use it for something that's not good for me. Well, if 20 family members are holding that expectation and one says, you know what, I understand you're going through something here. I'm just going to give you 20 bucks. Well, that 20 bucks can lead to addiction and a lot of consequences, right? Running back their addiction, having a relapse of some sort. So the addict will find that one person. Accountability. Hold that addict accountable by holding expectations, creating structure, and keeping boundaries. So again, the expectation, if I'm not going to hand out money or if I'm expecting you to be here at a certain time or do a certain thing, I'm going to hold you to that. Creating structure. I run a group on Monday nights, and one of my members who came to my group just shared how the structure is so important for them, and it goes for anybody, right? They went just overnight, Saturday into Sunday, with a family and stayed overnight downtown. And for them and their recovery, they have to pray every morning. Simple thing to, to some people, but for him, it's very important. And that day he didn't pray and he was irritable for, a good chunk of the day. His wife, luckily, is a part of his recovery process, and he's now honest with her. And his wife went to him, "You've been really upset today. Did you pray?" And he goes, "You know what? No, I didn't." And just that small little thing threw him off for a majority of his day. Um, Structure can be much more elaborate than that, but again, just one little thing, change of routine, led to something as big as that. And keeping boundaries. Seeking support. 12-step meetings, therapy, support groups. I'm going to mention some of those in the next few slides when I go over resources and treatment. Education, learning about codependency, addiction, and how it impacts relationships. You don't know what you don't know. So again, bringing awareness, bringing things to light. I can't tell you how many times that I'll be working with a couple or a family or just members in a group, and I'll say something that one would think is common knowledge or common sense, but oh my God, I never thought of it that way before. And it's just big moment. And then I'll have, like, maybe if it's a couple, the spouse say, "I've been telling you that for years." Yeah, but sometimes it makes a difference, where it's coming from. Utilizing CBT, analyzing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, how they're in relation to one another. How does your thought and feelings impact your behavior and vice versa? Boundaries need to be communicated assertively, verbally, and with action. Some steps in developing boundaries. Learn from those who set good boundaries. Copying what they do. It's nothing wrong with learning from somebody else and doing what they do. Having value for yourself, protecting yourself from physical and emotional harm. Practicing saying small no's. Um, Especially this is like the enabler, right? You want to say small no's, and if you feel guilty, it's good. That means you're setting limits. But we don't want to just say yes to everything all the time. When unsure, it's good to say no. You can always say yes later. It's better to undercommit than overcommit. If I tell you no right now, and then I think about it, I can say yes later and be able to help out with something. However, if I say yes to doing something early on without thinking about it, I may build resentment. And then resentment may lead to fear, may lead to inadequacy, shame, disappointment, and maybe it'll lead back to using or acting out. And respecting others' boundaries. Treatment options. Depending on the situation, who the addict is, treatment for the family may include one or more of the following: individual therapy for anyone significantly impaired, any one of those roles I talked about, or anybody else in the family. Couples or marriage therapy, whether the addict is, a parent, or, the couple, they need some therapy between them, or if it's learning how to deal with one of their addicted children, they can use help and support in becoming unified in how they're going to approach the child. Family therapy as a whole, once people feel good amongst themselves, they may approach family therapy to get that system into homeostasis. Group therapy and support groups. There's power in knowing that you're not alone, knowing that other people understand what you're feeling, what you're experiencing. There's very big power in that. If it's a family disease, why would somebody break it down to an individual couples level? I think I already explained that. These are just some resources. I'm going to start wrapping it up. Different types of meetings: AA for alcoholics, NA narcotics, HA heroin, CA cocaine. Mentioned Al-Anon, Nar-Anon. Those are for supportive people who have loved ones or those in their lives experiencing drinking or addiction. Alateen, Narateen, those are for teens with the same things. Again, just a lot of other groups listed here: parents of addicted loved ones, Families Anonymous, Smart Recovery, Refuge Recovery, Celebrate Recovery. GRASS, those are for people dealing with grief over the loss of a loved one. NAMI is a lot of mental illness, National Alliance of Mental Illness, learning to cope. Recovering Couples Anonymous, and Codependence Anonymous. And we've already talked in this presentation about why that's so important. There's other addictions that I haven't mentioned on there, other process addictions, for example, gambling, sex, shopping, etc., that are co-occurring and also have their own support meetings that need to be addressed to make the person whole. These are just a list of some books, Codependency, Al-Anon, Boundaries, so on and so forth, that it could be helpful. Helpful hints. Please have the substance of choice removed from the home. If unable, have it locked up where the user does not have access. And please keep your or the addict's prescription medication locked away as well. Why is this important? You're just removing accessibility, right? You want to make it as hard as possible for somebody to use. If somebody doesn't have access to it, you know what I mean? Hopefully the goal is that they won't leave to go get it, you know what I mean, for the holiday. And it'll just hinder their desire, and hopefully the craving or urge they have will dissipate. Family letters of consequence is very powerful, useful to the recovering user. This is usually when they're in recovery already. Addicts, unfortunately, are very, I don't want to say narcissistic, but very consumed with their own thinking and their own needs when they're in their active addiction. They don't really pay attention to how they've impacted their family or what consequences that their family members have experienced. And being able to read and see that, while it could be very triggering, it's also, in the right setting with the right support, it's very powerful, and keeping them from maybe wanting to use again down the line. Having a plan with a variety of things, knowing what the triggers are, knowing what to do if we're around a trigger, right? And that could change. Maybe going to a wedding is a trigger because there's an open bar there. So how do I handle that? I have to go support my family member, right? I care about them, I love them, or but if I go there, it's almost guaranteed I'm going to relapse. So maybe having a plan, I'll go to the reception. I'll go to the ceremony at the church, but I'll avoid going to the reception and explain to the family member why I can't do that. If a slip, lapse, or relapse happens, what do I do? We already talked about the timetable earlier. When, is there, how long do I have before I have to tell my family member? But is it calling my sponsor? Is it getting me to a meeting? Depending on the severity of the relapse, what level of treatment do I need? What to do at family gatherings, Thanksgiving, Christmas, all those things are coming up. If I get triggered, what can I do? So maybe my family doesn't know about my addiction. My spouse knows, maybe my parents know, but I don't want to tell my cousins that are there or certain uncles and aunts that are there. I'm not ready for that yet. So is there a signal that I can do for us to leave, whether it's verbal or nonverbal? Is there a secret word that we can say together? Knowing what to say versus not to say. Language is very powerful. Again, we don't want to hurt the addict by what we say. So maybe paying attention to, our verbals. And then getting education, support, and treatment if needed. And these are just references that I used. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny. That was great. I'm gonna open it up here for some comments or questions or anything. I just want to start off by commenting on a couple of things. It's interesting, like I had kind of known about the different family roles for a while, but once I kind of got back into recovery, it was interesting to note how I would fall into those roles depending on where I was in my recovery and which family member. Like I definitely dealt with codependency, and depending on which family member or loved one I was dealing with, I could be the caretaker or I could be the addict, and I would vacillate back and forth. So it's good to know that it's not just static where you're just the same role with every loved one. And I want to point out one other thing too that really stuck with me when I was in early sobriety, which was I was making some amends to people, and I was going around and doing that, and I was making amends with with a close friend, somebody who I kind of consider family. And, you know, I said my piece and I kind of asked at the end, like, you know, is there anything I left out or is there anything you want to tell me? And they told me this, that they weren't as upset about the using, like they understood that. But they were mad at me because they always had to lie for me. They always had to lie to cover up what I was doing. And that was really distressing for them. You know, they cared about me so much that they wanted to kind of keep that perception to everybody else that I was doing okay. And so I think that was like really eye-opening for me, as far as like when you're in early recovery, kind of coming to grips and understanding what it is, and the ways we can affect loved ones without even knowing it. So that was, yeah, great presentation. I do want to open it up here for comments. If anybody wants to, go ahead and hop on.
Danny, I appreciated the fact that when you were giving the presentation that you made it more applicable to how we could even use it with our current clients, and tips and tricks, especially around the holiday season, are extremely helpful. So thank you for including that.
Thanks, John.
Danny,
Hey,
I just
Danny,
wanted
it's
to say,
Chris. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
You know, my connection's unstable. Check the chat. I did ask a question.
Let's see. So the Chris's question was, any idea, even anecdotal, about greater likelihood of relapse during fourth quarter holidays? So what plan would you offer to minimize relapse likelihood? I'll let Danny answer, but I know just from my experience and kind of working in this field that yes, there does seem to be increased relapse potential in that fourth quarter. And I think a lot of that is due to family stress, and that's what I've seen in working with clients.
Right, exactly right. So like at the beginning of the presentation, I called it the trifecta, right? Because that's often what it's referred to. There's a lot of stress revolved around the holidays. You're sitting there being with family, maybe that you're not typically with. You want to present yourself in the best light possible, but maybe you're not there. So it's, again, is it more lies? Is it I'm being honest? Even if I'm being honest, that causes me stress because then people know that I'm not doing as well as I can be doing. You feel like you're the center of attention. Like I was saying earlier, the addict is often the center of attention. So it really increases a lot of the likelihood of relapse. Working in different substance use organizations, that's kind of when we see a flood of people coming in, is right between Christmas, or right before Thanksgiving to right around Christmas. Then it kind of dies a little bit, not because of need, but because people are trying to, you know, between Christmas and New Year's, are often either acting out or just trying to spend time with families. Then it'll pick up again a little bit after that. And in terms of what plan would I offer to minimize the relapse likelihood, those are some of the hints that I was kind of giving. So it's, let's talk about our triggers. Let's talk about how do we handle certain situations that they come up. I'm always about planning and discussing what it is that openly and honestly, what it is that bothers me, what can I do about it, what will help me versus what won't help me, right?
Any other questions or comments, y'all? I think Felicia wants to say something.
Hi. You know, when you were talking about the roles and codependency, a lot of things struck home, and, you know, self-awareness and knowing, you know, where you stand and what you've done in the past, that the self-awareness to me is like 80% of this battle. And I just want to say thank you, because some of the things that you were talking about, caretakers and heroes, really hit home. And I believe that, you know, learning about this and spreading this and being able to teach this to other people is going to be really beneficial. I have so many friends that don't have clear established boundaries, and I'm going to show your presentation.
Thanks, Felicia.
And if anybody go ahead. Who was next? Somebody started
Yeah,
talking.
I just wanted to make a comment if I may.
Sure, Ben.
First of all, Danny, thank you for the presentation. Family issues are sticky and they're complicated and they're many faceted. And one of the things I really appreciated that you mentioned was making a plan. I think it's really important. It's something, as a person with lived experience, I really made a plan. I rehearsed what I was going to say. I really made sure that that my plan was if I got cornered, if I felt like I was being cornered, that I had an exit strategy, that I had a partner who understood. For me, it was my wife. That if it gets too heavy, man, I got to go. So I'll get a headache, I'll catch something bad. I've got a tummy ache. The other thing that is interesting, just from my experience, is early in my sobriety, I absented myself for a year from family gatherings. I just said, I'm sorry, I can't make it. It's just not something I can do. Something that I needed to build some strength and power in order to kind of sit through those things again and understand that just because I'm clean and sober doesn't mean that everybody else is going to be, and to figure out how to handle that. And sometimes I can't handle it. I have to be out of there. I can't be present. But anyway, I thank you. A really nice presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben, and I'm glad you brought that up. It kind of goes with what I was saying toward the beginning about the rules changing, right? And what we need or don't need. In the beginning, for however long for you was a year, you can't be around it. That's a trigger for you, and being honest with yourself is so key about that, right? Then maybe after you felt comfortable around it, and maybe you went to 5 family gatherings and were fine, but all of a sudden this new one or this is particularly triggering, and being able to hold the boundary for yourself and protecting yourself, right? I can't be here right now. And hopefully, because you've been open with family or with whoever is so close to you beforehand, they'll understand when you have to remove yourself from the situation. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
And I just want to say one last thing. When I was very early on, maybe the first Thanksgiving, maybe probably even to the second one, I think my family knew that it made me feel uncomfortable talking about it. So then they wouldn't bring up the subject, but then like the elephant was in the room, right? So like everybody knew what we weren't talking about. And sometimes the stress from not talking about it is just as great as the stress of talking about it. So yeah, it really is about finding that comfortable medium for yourself. And if that the weight of that type of stress is too much for the first year, like Ben said, maybe think about being absentee. That might be the best route for you. Danny, great presentation. Thank you everybody for showing up. I am going to put this on our YouTube page, so if you know somebody who missed it, we'll have a recording of that. We are taking a month off in December from the presentation, but in January, we're going to be doing a presentation on domestic violence and how that intersects with substance use. So I'll be looking forward to that. If anybody has any questions, let me know. But yeah, thank you again, y'all, and let's have a wonderful day.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Dave.
everyone.
Thanks, Danny.
Thanks,
Bye, guys.
everybody. Thanks, Danny.
Thank you all.
Bye, y'all.